my name is Jérôme Noailly, and I am a faculty researcher at BIOsys Medtech, which is a biomedical engineering research unit of the Department of Information and Communication Technologies at the Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona in Spain. I'm interested in many things, but if I would have to sum up my passions in few words, I would say music, science fiction, and technology. In particular, I have always felt a strong attraction for conceptualization and modeling to achieve tangible creations. So besides art, I guess that this sensitivity has largely motivated my dedication to research and to modeling and simulation. I haven't really chosen my field of study according to a plan or to a specific professional objective. It has rather been the result of natural evolution over the years, driven by circumstances and subjective choices. And actually, I have always been astonished by the capacity of theoretical modeling to translate concepts into deep rational understanding and control of complex processes, such as those involved in biological systems and life in general. So computational approaches are undoubtedly pushing forward this capacity, promoting unprecedented anticipation of knowledge beyond current collections of data and evidences. And I guess that this is why I have eventually embraced a research career in computational biomedical engineering. In my team, we're developing multi-scale models for tissue and organ regulation. We have long-standing expertise in cartilaginous systems, such as the intervertebral disc. And for example, right now we're coordinating a European project, which is called Disc for All, for translational research in intervertebral disc degeneration that combines many sources of data and many model and simulation technologies. So more broadly, in my team, so we exploit model and simulation technologies to understand the synergistic role of mechanical and biochemical stimulations in the proper maintenance of load-bearing tissues and organs. This effort aims to provide us with reference mechanisms that we can then duly interpret to further explain degenerative processes upon multifactorial biological and physical perturbations of the systems that we study. So right now, these systems include actually body joints, bone, lungs, and arteries. And in terms of methodology, we couple classical approaches and computational engineering, such as finite element modeling, with methods in computational biology that include agent network modeling. And this combination of heterogeneous modeling technologies allows us to virtually travel across the scales, from organs to cells and molecules, to explore causative relationships involved in disorders, such as intervertebral disc degeneration, as I have mentioned, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, lung emphysema, and atherosclerosis. So we developed the models so that they can incorporate and interpolate biological and clinical evidence that are typically provided by laboratory experiments and clinical diagnostic tools. So hopefully this research can positively contribute to the target of biomarkers, risk factors, and prevention and therapeutic strategies in highly multifactorial disorders that have long-term silent evolution, and where in general early diagnostic and curative therapies stand for a huge challenge. So in silico medicine, might sound very specific to someone who is out of that field, but actually when you're in the field, it's already a very wide concept. So as far as the particular motivation of my research is concerned, so I think that I have more or less answered this question before. But basically many disorders, and for example, rheumatological or vasculars, are diagnosed after decades of silent evolution under the influence of many heterogeneous factors. Once affected systems are decompensated, there is not a unique cause anymore of disease evolution, and it's very challenging to identify any therapy that is not merely palliative. As a consequence, affected people have dramatically decreased quality of life with highly disabling chronic pain, for example, in osteoarthritis and intervertebral degeneration, and risk of death in respiratory and vascular disorders. So the problem becomes obviously worse with aging. But it's important to highlight that a significant percentage of the population is already affected around the fifth decade of life and will have to cope with serious disability during many years. So I believe that models and simulations used, as I explained before, are utmost powerful to identify personalized risk factors, therapeutical targets in an educated way by taking into account molecule to organ regulation over different timescales, especially the potential ability to virtually simulate the dynamic propagation of specific perturbations over different timescales is a huge asset for prevention, early diagnosis, in addition to therapy. Definitively, yes. The modeling and simulation approaches that I am tackling in my research aim to unravel complexity and are mostly interpretation means by the time being. Validating this model is a real challenge because they simulate what cannot be measured with our current medical technologies. Of course, parts of the models can be validated through experimental counterparts, but we shouldn't forget that these counterparts are also models, themselves disconnected from the real human body physiology, even if they are experimental. So there is a clear problem of standardization, of use and definition of safety and liability if we want to translate these complex models as tools in the healthcare industry. Experimental technologies are also evolving. So thinking about organ-on-a-chip technologies, for example, so molecular diagnostic technologies are evolving. And one day we might expect to achieve enough points of evidence to duly validate complex interpretable models for the exploitation in the healthcare industry. However, having said that, models don't need to be complex to have a value, clinically speaking. And high-level or phenomenological models and simulations can be much easier to validate against real-world data, and their predictability can be proved much more robustly. So the most phenomenological models I can think of would be those that are mostly data-driven and that integrate algorithms for data analytics based on machine learning, for example. These models can tremendously help in establishing relationships among heterogeneous data and improve patient stratification for more personalized diagnostic and treatments for many disorders. And I think that such more accessible technology, and I'm not saying that it's an easier technology, has a great potential to make its way through in the healthcare industry. And actually, this is something that has started. And the corresponding regulations for good practice, safety, liability is already being discussed by policymakers in collaborations with public regulation agencies and industrial stakeholders. And in general, there's good news. So I think that once these models with clear repeatable success stories, for example, in medical diagnostic or pharmaceutical industry, transfer of technology of more complex forms of interpretable models and simulations will progress tremendously. Since I'm not an industrial, it's difficult for me to answer robustly. But I would say that the most immediate priorities are to prove the efficacy and safety, to define proper regulation framework and standards for liability, depending on specific types of use, of course. Support for diagnostic might not be as risky as a treatment decision system, for example. So regulations and standards might probably need to include clear definitions of good simulation practices, depending on the type of modeling technologies, and clear definitions regarding the quality of the input data. I think that data quality is particularly critical for data-driven models, of course, in the calibration and independent validation phases. Hence, access to data is important, and it must be properly regulated, and I would say as well as a transparent use of these data. So I think that a misuse of data and data-driven model could lead to questions of potential and safety of models and simulations in health. And it stands for a real threat that should be unconditionally avoided. So I think it's better to do things properly since the very beginning, and the healthcare industry might need to team up in this sense.